Welcome to Classical Ideas. This is Greg Soden. Hello from my backyard, where I'm recording this introduction during a gorgeous August of this very challenging 2020. And I'm sitting here thinking about all of my teacher friends, pre-K through university level, out there going back to school under such varying circumstances. I hope you're managing to find some peace and consistency amidst the maelstrom I know you're all experiencing. So on to this topic for this episode. The ways people express their religiosity beyond just sitting in a pew or performing personal prayer or observing centuries-old religious rituals is an interesting topic to me. In what ways does religion live beyond the observable practices that occur in holy sites or houses of worship? If that question intrigues you as well, this conversation is for you. My guest on this episode is Dr. Alyssa Maldonado-Estrada. Dr. Maldonado-Estrada is Assistant Professor of Religion at Kalamazoo College, where she teaches classes on religion and masculinity, Catholics in the Americas, urban religion, and religions of Latin America. She is an ethnographer, and her research focuses on material culture, contemporary Catholicism, and gender and embodiment. She is the author of Lifeblood of the Parish, Men and Catholic Devotion in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, which is out soon from NYU Press. The book is an ethnography about masculinity and men's devotional lives in a gentrified neighborhood in New York City. Her brand new book, available for pre-order now, is the topic of our conversation. We went deep on ethnographic research, gentrification of Brooklyn, manliness, religious expression and devotion beyond the pew, and the Our Lady of Mount Carmel Parish Feast Festival, and the annual raising of the Giglio. This is such an awesome conversation, and I know that many of you listening will want to read or possibly even teach this book. What's so great is that right now, if you pre-order the book directly from New York University Press's online store, you can use the discount code LIFEBLOOD30 to receive 30% off your pre-order. A link to the online store is in the show notes, so check it out to order the book. In some podcast apps, the link is clickable, but you might need to copy and paste the link. It was an absolute delight having Dr. Maldonado-Estrada on Classical Ideas podcast. We've been talking about doing this episode for a long time, and it's fantastic to finally make it happen. If you want to follow her on Twitter, you can find her at EMO Professor. That's EMO Professor. And you can find me on Twitter at classical_ideas. Without further delay, please enjoy my conversation on Lifeblood of the Parish with Dr. Alyssa Maldonado-Estrada. Dr. Alyssa Maldonado-Estrada, welcome to Classical Ideas, finally.
Thanks for having me.
It's so wonderful to finally have you on the show. We've been Twitter pals for so long now, and I am just so excited that your book is coming out. But before we dive into everything that we're here to talk about today, I'm wondering if you can just introduce yourself to the audience however you see fit. I know that many will already know you, though, so you can just say hello to those people as well.
Okay. Hey, everyone. So my name is Alyssa Maldonado-Estrada. I am a professor of religion at Kalamazoo College. I got my PhD in religion from Princeton. I specialize in the study of Catholicism, material religion, and men and masculinities. And I'm an ethnographer, which I hope we'll talk a bunch about in this episode.
Wonderful. Yes, we will. And so before we dive into all of your content area, I live in New York, and whenever I go over to New York City, you are my Manhattan restaurant suggester. And I'm wondering if you can just tell me a little bit about growing up in New York City, in Manhattan, because I feel like that is super important to understanding the context of your work, which we'll dive into. So I feel like context is key for your background. Tell me about growing up in New York City.
Yeah, I love this question. So I'm from the Lower East Side. My roots there are super deep. My grandma grew up in the Lower East Side. My mom grew up in the Lower East Side. So yeah, I live in Michigan now and I miss it dearly. But growing up in New York City is wild and crazy and magical. I went to high school around the corner from the stock exchange in an office building.
Whoa.
So we were on the 11th, 12th, and 13th floors across the street from Goldman. We didn't have like a gym. And after school, we would hop on the train and go hang out in the East Village with all the punks on St. Mark's Place. So I was like, what stories can I share about growing up in New York? And I have a really funny one. So one day, I was in high school and there was a rodeo in Madison Square Garden. So there was like this guerrilla marketing campaign. There was a like bull cab, like imagine a yellow taxi, but clad in like cowhide with bull horns. So this bull cab was going around New York City and if you hailed it, you got to take it wherever you wanted in the city completely for free. So me and my friends, we hailed this cab, we saw it, and we all piled in. And the cab driver's like, where do you want to go? And we were like, you know what? Take us to Boston Market in Chelsea, of all the places. The teenage imagination is crazy. So we get to Boston Market. We're, of course, eating our food. And who's there? Fat Joe, like the rapper Fat Joe, is in Boston Market, also like chowing down. So I feel like that's what it was like to grow up in New York. It was like always super spontaneous. There was always something happening. Back then, there was a huge Virgin Records store on Union Square that doesn't exist anymore, but it was so cool. You could be walking by and your favorite band is having like an album drop concert right there. So yeah, just like cool alternative stuff. It was amazing.
Yeah.
I'm so grateful.
Last time I went there, I went for the Misfits and Rancid at Madison Square Garden, and you sent me so many amazing suggestions, like Black Seed Bagels was one that stands out. Veselka stands out a lot. I was right around the corner from Veselka, and I was in this 5th floor walk-up apartment, which was, it's surreal to think about, families growing up in these apartments. It was this tiny apartment. What was the home life like growing up in that area? Because like I come from an area where it's like 2,000 square foot ranch houses in suburbia, but like you're really stacked on top of each other in neighborhoods like that, yeah?
Yeah. So where we lived on the 26th floor of a building in the Lower East Side. So like there are all these co-op buildings and a parish. And so we were up there on the 26th floor. So the views of the Williamsburg Bridge were amazing, but it is this kind of, I don't know, different level of life.
So cool.
And now I, of course, live in the suburbs. It's super different.
Such a shift. Did you live near that Hare Krishna tree in that park in Alphabet City?
So I'm a little bit a ways away, like a little walk away.
Sure.
But Tompkins Square Park was where we used to hang out.
Amazing.
And just like eat Belgian fries and have like weird picnics.
Oh my gosh. And then like there's so much religion in New York City too. Like I was walking around and I stumbled across the first Zen Institute founded by Sokeon Sasaki. And I was like, this is crazy. I was at the Hare Krishna tree 6 blocks away. Now I'm at like the first Zen Institute and I'm just walking around stumbling across these places by accident. It was so cool.
Urban religion.
Love it. Love it. All right, cool. So I'm curious about how spirituality came to be important to you. Because as a religious studies scholar, I'm always curious about people's path into that profession. Was your interest devotional? Was it academic? How did you come at this?
Yeah, so I would say growing up in New York City, there's just so much religious diversity and religious eclecticism that you almost take for granted. And so growing up, my mom sent me to do my sacraments in a Catholic church. So I used to go to communion class and confirmation class.
Yeah, me too.
When I was doing my confirmation, I was also like super goth at the same time.
Nice.
So I would show up with like a pentagram t-shirt.
Worshiping Davey Havoc with the pentagram.
Exactly at that same time. So I had my AFI pentagram shirt, show up to Catholic school, and I'm like, yo, I am so alternative right now. So I did that, and it's so interesting. At the same time, this storefront Pentecostal church had opened up, and they had a like Friday night program for kids. And my mom was like, hey, you guys should go there. So me and my brother would go to this Pentecostal church on Friday nights. Obviously, when I was that young, I didn't have the language to understand this was a storefront church or this was a Pentecostal church. I just thought this was a Christian church, and that's how all Christians did things. So I would do Catholic stuff on Sundays. I would do Pentecostal stuff other days of the week. And then I had people in my family that practiced Santeria and other kind of Afro-Caribbean traditions. My grandma always had a altar for Saint Lazarus in her closet. Of course, I found out later in life that she also practiced like espiritismo or spiritism.
Wow.
So in my own family, I had a lot of religious diversity. And so when I got to college, I realized all of that because I took it for granted. And then I started getting interested in the study of religion.
That is so cool. So when did you find religious studies as an academic path within college? Were you an undergrad? Was it going into grad school? What was that path like leading into this?
Yeah, so it was an undergrad. I was a sociology and religion major
cool.
at Vassar College in Poughkeepsie. So first I was a sociology major, and then I took a class on new religious movements with Christopher White. And at that point in time, I was really interested in the study of deviance from a sociological perspective. Oh, sweet.
Yeah, nice.
And then when I took this new religious movements class, I was like, wait, you can study religion and deviance? And I got super interested in that. And then I realized that I didn't see a lot of the practices that I had known or grown up with reflected in some of the texts I was reading in my classes. And so I would always ask my professors and my advisors, hey, can I do an independent study? And usually they were on board. So one summer I did an independent study on urban religion. So I picked out all these books that were about religion in New York. So I read God in Chinatown by Kenneth Guest. I read Madonna of 115th Street by Robert Orsi. And with each of these books, I figured, hey, I'm in New York. I have a Metro card. Why don't I just visit some of these sites?
Amazing.
And it was in realizing that the city could be a place of study that I saw the possibility of me doing this.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So I had all of these great mentors at Vassar College that were super supportive of that. And so it was this one day I was on jury duty. In New York City. I was sitting in the courthouse. I was reading Robert Orsi's Madonna of 115th Street. And I was like, wait, this feast is happening this week. I could just take the train and go there. And it was in that experience that I realized that this was what I wanted to do and what I wanted to study. And then I had great mentors who let me kind of help them put together syllabi. So there's a professor at Vassar, Jonathan Kahn, who was one of my mentors. And I was his research assistant, and I worked on book proposals with him and planning conferences. So I really got to see what the life of an academic was.
In an undergrad, you were doing that, the proposals and stuff?
Yeah.
Oh, that's so great.
That's why, yeah, the professors at Vassar were the best. They were such good mentors.
Did you stick around at Vassar for the master's, or did you go on to Princeton for the master's and then the PhD?
Yeah, so Vassar just is like undergrad.
Gotcha.
And then I went to Princeton for my master's and my PhD.
Awesome. So you have a book coming out, and the book is from NYU Press. It's called Lifeblood of the Parish, Men and Catholic Devotion in Williamsburg, Brooklyn. And so this is an ethnographic study about masculinity, money, gentrification, and material culture centered on a Catholic parish in Brooklyn, in Williamsburg. And it's part of this ongoing North American Religions series from NYU Press, which is really cool. I was looking at all the titles that are presented in the introduction of your book as well, like right on the inside cover. And this is such a fantastic series. I'm curious about your interest in ethnography as a research method. So, you know, professors all have their different methods that they kind of like specialize in, that they pursue because it works the best for them. They find it to be gripping professionally and intellectually. In what ways does ethnographic research keep you engaged and curious in your work?
Yeah. So I'm always excited to talk about ethnography. And
Yay.
as I mentioned, I got my first taste of this when I was an undergrad, kind of going around the city and realizing that there was so much to learn about religion just in the built environment, just in visiting different religious sites. And what I love so much about ethnography is that you have to be open to kind of serendipity and going into new spaces and being open to the unexpected. So when I first started studying this parish, so it's the Church of Our Lady of Mount Carmel in Williamsburg. When I first started studying them, I was at a mass one day, and it was a nighttime mass. And at mass, somebody brings up the gifts, so like the communion host and the wine to the front. And I was sitting there, I thought I was just going to be doing observation. But of course, like somebody indicates, like, hey, you should go bring up the gifts. And I'm like, I don't think I'm qualified for this. Are you sure that you want me to do this? I don't know. I haven't gone to confession, like whatever I was worried about.
Yeah.
And so I stand up and I have the wine and I go walk it to the front. And the pastor of the church, I'm handing him the wine, and he looks at me and he was like, you never know what you're going to be doing around here. And that was so true. Like it was such a prophetic statement, because I did so many things that I wasn't expecting. So I had to be like up for anything. And it's also, ethnography is also such a social art of engaging with people that are different from you.
Yeah.
And going with the flow and kind of learning their ways and learning how to become part of the community. I mean, you're always an outsider, but there is this dance of kind of like insiderness and outsiderness too.
Did you find this parish on accident? Was this from the Orsi book that you found this place in specific? Like, why this one place? What brought you there?
Yeah, so initially I thought that I was going to do kind of a comparative study about different gentrified neighborhoods and the way Italian Catholic communities reconstitute themselves in the summertime, and kind of ritually reclaim the neighborhoods. So I thought I would study the San Gennaro feast in Little Italy. I thought I would study the Fisherman's Feast in Boston, in addition to the Feast of Our Lady of Mount Carmel in Williamsburg. So for some of my undergrad research, I had visited all of these places and got super interested in neighborhood change and Catholic ritual and how different ethnic communities kind of coexist and compete in these spaces. And I also thought I would even study East Harlem. So I thought it was going to be all of these communities, because every project starts off super big and then you whittle it down. But obviously this parish is special because there's nothing like the Giglio, which we will talk about. This huge monumental tradition in which men lift this 70-foot tall 4-ton tower through the streets of Brooklyn. And they've been doing so since 1903. So it's like astounding when you finally get to visit. So I knew that this was a place that I wanted to study, having done some more informal observations there.
Can you tell me a little bit about the context of Catholicism in Williamsburg or Brooklyn in general? Like what's going on in Brooklyn regarding Catholicism right now?
Yeah. So it's interesting. Catholicism in Brooklyn, I would say, is very much thriving. And the Diocese of Brooklyn is a huge diocese, and there's so many churches. But like other kind of Catholic communities in the Northeast, there are a lot of parishes that have been closing or merging. And especially in Brooklyn, there are parishes that have closed, and then the diocese has sold off those very old buildings to developers. And so there are now churches that used to be ethnic parishes that are condominiums.
Yeah.
So what's interesting to me about the Shrine Church of Our Lady of Mount Carmel is that they have a Catholic tradition that is big and loud and monumental, and it's tenacious. Like, it's thriving there, and this parish has been there since 1887, and it is still there, even as so many other parishes in surrounding neighborhoods are closing or otherwise struggling. So it's intact despite all of these different urban changes. And I would
Wow.
say in Brooklyn, like in other Northeast and Midwest cities, there have been periods of kind of white flight and what scholars call urban exodus, where a certain ethnic group leaves a parish and another ethnic group kind of fills in their place, whether that be Mexican or Vietnamese or Haitian. And at this parish, it still retains its Italian identity when so many parishes have lost that. So I'm very interested in how this church that's now hedged in by all of these condos, that has been threatened by urban renewal, has this fierce desire to preserve its community, but it's not static. Like, they're remarkably flexible in how they've dealt with different urban changes.
Yeah, the gentrification aspect of your book is super important, and I'd love to know about this context as well a little bit. So Williamsburg is like well known as like a rapidly gentrifying and trendy area. Like, people all over the country know about Williamsburg, Brooklyn. Growing up in Missouri, I knew about Williamsburg. Yet I'd imagine that like old Williamsburg is like hanging on in like these residential streets where people who have been there for generations prior to like the development that we currently see, like these people pre-exist these trends. How is like old Williamsburg still present amidst the gentrification? And I'm curious if like new arrivals to old Williamsburg are missing what's in front of their very eyes, like this history that goes back generations.
Yeah. So if you'll let me say a few things about like the development of Williamsburg, sure. I'm obviously obsessed with this. Okay. So before Brooklyn became part of the city of New York, Williamsburg, Greenpoint, Bushwick, so all of these kind of like hot gentrified areas now where all the millennials want to live,
right,
was part of the Eastern District. So in accounts from the time, people say, this place is crime ridden. Only lowly people live there. Like, it was an immigrant district. And so, early Italians that lived there did not have a church of their own. And some of them worshiped in the basement of a parish on North 6th Street, a German parish. Some of them had to worship in an Episcopal church. So it wasn't until this like pioneering priest, his name was Peter Saponara, was like, hey, I have to open a national parish for the Italians of Williamsburg. So he opened this parish, and in the early 20th century, the Italian population was booming. So eventually they needed to close down this little parish and build a bigger structure. So they build this huge Romanesque church with this big tower and these beautiful frescoes inside. And the church was completed in 1930. Obviously, they had fundraised for it. Everybody was super excited. But of course, something bad looms. Robert Moses decides, hey, how about we build a highway right through this section of the neighborhood?
Oh, my God.
So this church was less than 20 years old. And the city decided to seize the land and had to dismantle the church. And the parishioners of Our Lady of Mount Carmel were not sure that they were still even going to have a parish. And so a lot of them, I don't have any historical evidence of this, but the narrative is that this parish was saved because of the feast.
Wow.
So the diocese rebuilds a new church just a few blocks away. And I think that it's very interesting that gentrification is just a new set of kind of like urban changes or antagonistic policies that they've had to deal with. So they look all around and they're like, okay, there are new condominiums, there are new bike lanes, there are new neighbors that call 311 to complain about us and our processions. But our ancestors dealt with urban renewal, dealt with the highway, dealt with the church being torn down. So they see this like survival ethic that they need to keep. And so Williamsburg now, since in 2005, Michael Bloomberg, the mayor, did one of the largest rezoning plans in New York City's history and rezoned a lot of the industrial manufacturing areas of Williamsburg to be commercial and residential and And of course, like there was lots of luxury development, waterfront condominiums. And so over the past 15 years, Williamsburg has dramatically changed. And so in the book, I call it super gentrification, kind of using other urban studies scholarship for that, or hyper gentrification. And so now Williamsburg is so gentrified that there aren't those kinds of like gems left. I would say there's no stone unturned. But during the feast, the like Italian residents that are still there, decorate their homes. You can see the flags, they have streamers. And so you can see the like family strongholds that still exist. But largely a lot of people have moved away, but they come back to this neighborhood for masses, for the feast, to work in the parish. And so there's not the same story of kind of people dispersing and like this parish dying. No, this parish is still very vital because people are committed to traveling back no matter what.
Amazing. So the beginning of your book really captivated me as well, because you start the book in a way that just speaks to somebody like me. So I like, ugly stuff that's like hidden away. I'm super into like basements and, old grain silos and driving down the highway and looking at like old rusted roofs of old factories. Like I like stuff like that. So you grip me right away by examining the underbelly cellar of the church. Tell me about this choice as a writer. Why did you start in the dusty, forgotten, underbelly of this church in general? Why did you go there as the first thing in the chapters?
Yeah. So in general, I'm interested in the back stages of religion, like the places where things are hidden. And so if you go to the feast in the summer, and I encourage anybody who can to do this, you'll see that there's this huge, beautiful tower that's called the Giglio. Men are lifting it. The streets are groomed and decorated. There's a beautiful Ferris wheel. Everything looks so put together and kind of ritually whole from the front stage. But then when you really start paying attention or like following people in their everyday religious practices, you see that all of these things actually come together in the basement of the church. So there's this, like, you walk down these stairs and you go down this little ramp, and the basement is where this huge tower gets dismembered, and it's laying in all of these pieces. There are old statues of Jesus tipped over. Everything is dusty. And so you would imagine all of these things that are apparently precious or seemingly sacred, like statues and other kinds of religious objects in the basement, they're just laying next to paint cans and kind of gathering all of this sediment of history. And so I'm really interested in this space as like irreverent and subterranean, but also as the kind of place where the sacred gets constructed and a place where men learn how to interact with sacred objects, how to craft sacred objects themselves. And so the basement is where a lot of men spend their time all throughout the year building, painting this Giglio, so this tower that you would see in the summer. And while it might seem kind of peripheral, it's a central and vital site of practice for them. And they see that as a space where they're enacting their devotion and also helping their parish. And so it's cool. They're like, I talk about this in the book, they're like severed heads on shelves, naked statues. And it's not what you expect when you think about Catholic stuff.
Sure. So tell me a little bit more about this feast really quick, because you've mentioned it several times. I think this might be something that it's so exciting. The images that are in the book are exciting. The crowds are exciting. The tower is exciting. What is the purpose of this feast? When does it take place during the year?
Yeah, so it usually takes place the beginning of July, so sometimes the second and third week of July. So it celebrates Our Lady of Mount Carmel and Saint Paulinus, aka San Paulino. San Paulino is the patron saint of Nola, Italy. Nola is a small town outside of Naples in the Campania region of southern Italy. and the Giglio. So I mentioned it a few times. The Giglio is this massive kind of tapered tower that is built from paper mache. It's on an aluminum base. It weighs 4 tons. It takes about 120 men to carry it through the streets. And this ritual comes from NOLA. And in NOLA, they lift 8 of these Giglios, but they're made out of wood over there. And it started with Nolani immigrants settling in Williamsburg in 1903 is the earliest date that the Giglio was lifted in Brooklyn. And so St. Paulinus was a 5th century bishop. The legend goes that NOLA was overrun by pirates. They were enslaving Nolani children, Nolani people, and taking them away. And he pled on behalf of a widow's son that he should go in his place. So San Paulino is taken away. And eventually the Sultan finds out that he's a bishop and thinks this is such a valiant thing and sends him sailing back with all of the people from NOLA to the shores of NOLA. And the people greet him on the shores with a tower of lilies, and Giglio is lily in Italian. And so that's the origin story.
Awesome. I was overlooking that and I was like, wait a minute, I need to know about this feast in a little more detail, because now I totally want to go and I just want to behold this. And then I also want to eat $500 worth of food in New York City, over the course of this festival. Do you know what I mean? Just restaurant hop, go see the Giglio, and then just go eat more food.
Yes. And so it's so interesting if you go. So you'll see, obviously, men are lifting this huge tower. And also there's a boat that's lifted as well. So the boat and the Giglio kind of reenact this story of San Paulino.
Holy moly. That sounds so awesome. Okay. So this is really interesting about lived religion that we've talked about before. So in your book, religion means far more than just attending a church service, receiving communion, devotional practice. It's way more than that. And what I appreciate about this book is the fun and the playfulness that emerges from these men that you feature in the book and their friendships through church. I'm curious if you can tell me about the expansive nature of men practicing religion beyond just the pew. Why is that basement, that camaraderie, that friendship, why is that so central to these guys' devotion?
Yeah. So I initially thought that this was just a thing that happens in the streets. And it's not until I started spending a lot of time with them that I saw all of these peripheral sites of practice. And so I got interested in the making of this ritual and how and why it is so central to the parish and so synonymous with the parish. So one of the places that I spent a lot of time was the basement. I became one of the painters of the Giglio. You can read more about that story in the book. I was the first woman to ever paint the Giglio.
What?
So I spent a lot of time down there painting saints and kind of undergoing this process of training that a lot of men or young men, teenage boys, undergo to become part of this community, to learn the ways, to learn the craft. One of the other places is the money room. So the feast, and we can talk a little bit more about this later too. The feast is a huge fundraiser for the parish. And if anybody's been to a Catholic festival or procession before, you know that people give money to the church during collections. People will give money to the saints in chapels or in shrines, and all of that money needs to be accounted for. And the money room is where that happens. And what's so cool, I think, about this community is that men dress up and play characters in the life of San Paulino. So they'll wear costumes and they get to play in this drama. And so it's not the piety you would expect.
Right.
It is fun and it is raucous and, they're drinking and carrying on, but it's all part and parcel of devotional practice, but it's not solemn and not always serious in the way we sometimes expect Catholicism to be, or Catholic devotion to be. And a lot of the guys too, I write about this, have tattoos. So they use their own skin to show off and kind of connect, to show off their devotion and connect to the saints in lots of different ways, and also connect to each other and build all of these close, loving relationships.
Is there like sort of like any tattoo images that they are prone to get? Is there like a something that's like, oh, hey, I got it, you know, I got my thing done? Is like sort of like a rite of passage? Is there anything like that involved?
Yeah, so a lot of the men have Giglio tattoos.
Oh, cool.
A lot of Giglio tattoos. And so sometimes they'll get a tattoo of the first Giglio that they ever helped paint in the basement, or they'll get a tattoo of the Giglio design that their father would have lifted in the 60s, because the designs change every couple of years. The Giglio
Awesome.
is rebuilt. A lot of them will get tattoos of Our Lady of Mount Carmel. So yeah, there is a lot of recurring imagery, but no tattoos are the same. Like, they invest them with different stories.
Tell me a little bit about the importance of Scotch and Swords.
Yes. Okay. So I love this. So, okay, I'll start with swords. So
Okay.
I mentioned the story of San Paulino.
Yeah.
The Sultan sails back. So there is a position of honor at the feast called the Turk. And there's lots of kind of like Orientalist play happening in this position. So a man is chosen to play the Turk, and he sails, like he rides on the boat that meets with the Giglio, kind of reenacting the hagiography of San Paulino. And the Turk dresses up kind of in stereotypical fashion, a turban and kind of harem pants and lame, and some, you know, they go over the top with this. Some men have brought actual camels to walk through the streets of Williamsburg with them to kind of play up this. And so it is this kind of flamboyant display. And so one of the objects of honor is the Turk's sword. It's been in the community since the 50s, and every Turk kind of ritually hands it down to the next Turk. And I argue that men learn to be masculine and become masculine within this community through their engagements with material objects. So you get the sword, you know how to hold it, you know how to wield it, you learn how to kind of embody this figure from this sacred story. And then the Scotch, there are all of these different rituals that happen in the community. So one of them, the Giglio gets lifted on Giglio Sunday, and the day before that is something called the Questua. So during the Questua means begging. Different crews of men and women and children go out through the neighborhood and hand out blessed bread to kind of spread the word about the feast. Some of these crews have a more party atmosphere than others. So they'll be handing out blessed bread, drinking scotch, processing through the streets with a brass band, and all of this. So again, like drinking in the streets, wearing rhinestones and different costumes. These are not the things we normally associate with Catholic devotionalism, at least in the U.S. But here there is that kind of play and is that kind of irreverence that's particularly the domain of men.
I love it. And but it feels like so New York as well. Like, it's not something you would associate with Catholicism, but like whenever you say this is happening in New York City, I'm like, of course it's happening in New York City. This is great. It's great. Okay, so something that really jumps out to me as well is we currently are living in a period of time where a lot of academic research that's coming out now is almost like focusing on like the subaltern, like previously unexplored voices within scholarship. And this is really fascinating to me because a lot of people mention that scholarly attention is turning to giving attention to women roles within religion. At the exact moment, you are training your focus on men. And I looked at the images in the book, and these fellas seem to be a largely white group of men. And you also talk about how important these guys are to keeping this parish alive, even as people you talk to say there must be women in the background running this. So tell me a little bit about your ideas of exploring men who are white in religion in 2020, because it threw me for a loop a little bit.
Yeah. So I love this question. Thank you. And I think so much of the scholarship within lived religion was about exploring domestic spaces, alternative spaces, backyards, kind of gyms, other places where religion is happening and where women are the main actors and main characters. So turning the lens away from priests and away from authority figures. And this scholarship was essential in shaping me and the questions that I have and how I proceeded with this ethnography. So what I found when I started getting to know this community, I was like, wait, all of these men are hanging out. They're planning processional routes. They're planning lunches. They're making devotional objects. They're doing all of this work that a lot of people would just assume that women do, because women are usually the ones doing this backstage labor. And so in this parish, I think it's really interesting that men are doing that work and that work is masculinized in a certain way. I think within religious studies, we are used to seeing, sports and religion, war and religion, politics and religion as the places that are the domains of men. Like we're like, okay, yes, men are screaming and praying together in stadiums, or they're on the battlefield kind of thinking about their relationship with God, or they're in the gym building their muscles and trying to imitate Jesus through doing that. But at this parish, of course, there is all of that like muscular things with lifting the Giglio, but some of the men are, they're doing paper mache, and that's how they're like loving their parish and maintaining their connections to the Catholic Church. And so I think it's interesting at this moment to read about these men in particular, because there's so many declension narratives happening right now, so many declension narratives about Catholicism and churches in general. People aren't going to church. Young people aren't going to church. And in this community, we see that there is a community of young men where they're like, okay, this church matters to me. Saints matter to me. This parish matters. And so I always am interested in why that retention, like what is keeping people here. And I think that we see that Catholic ritual, Catholic communities offer some kind of meaningful route to manhood that maybe isn't accessible everywhere else, and offers a place where men can achieve power and glory and authority and respect. And I think that that's interesting that they do that through devotionalism, which is sometimes an arena that is thought to be the domain of women. So they do that. They get power and all of those things, but they also have friendships and create lifelong bonds with each other, and kind of masculinize all of this work, which might otherwise seem not their domain.
Yeah, well, what's really interesting about that is so I grew up in a Catholic parish as well in Missouri, in St. Louis, and I left, and so many people leave, and it feels like this particular parish has the formula right for retention and for keeping their young men engaged and involved. And there's a passage in your book that you write that talks about men as the machinery almost. So it says there must be some matriarchal core to this, or women must be raising the money, right? Assuming that where there are men doing religion, there are women working the gears and making things run, doing the invisible and unappreciated labor. While that is often true, this ritual and community asks us to look for where and how men do religion. In this devotional work, men are both its public face and its machinery. Devotion is sustaining work. And I love that notion of men as the machinery because of all the building. And I almost feel like the basement is almost more important than the sanctuary to these guys, because when you're building something, I feel like that is their devotion, not as much sitting in the pew on one day a week. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And so I really like this machinery metaphor, because so rituals are not just finished products, they are processes. And I think machinery hints at that. But I think men and masculinity is made, it's constructed. And so in making this ritual, I think men are also made as they are doing this devotion. And so especially in the basement, as the Giglio is being built, I would argue that a certain kind of masculinity is being built and enacted and embodied as well. And so it's interesting, especially so because a lot of these men have family that are from this community or like lived in the neighborhood or can trace all of these generations of connections to the feast. They say things like, the feast is in my blood. This is in my DNA. And so Lifeblood of the Parish thinks a little bit about that. And I'm interested in all of the ways becoming a Catholic and becoming a man is a pedagogical process. So all of this takes making and production, whether that's like learning how to connect to the saints in the basement, learning how to wear certain costumes, and learning the stories of the saints through putting your own body into those stories. All of that matters. And so the feast, while you see just kind of a complete picture from the front, somebody's doing somebody's building the Giglio, somebody's tending to the candles, somebody's counting collections, somebody's caring for the shrine. So there are all of these backstage places where there are women doing work there as well. And I talk a little bit about that, but there are men doing all of that work and achieving a certain kind of masculinity in doing that. So the payoff of all of this, there has to be a payoff, is that with decades of work for the community, decades of dedication to the parish, men can become capos. So a capo is a man who commands the Giglio. He gives orders to the lifters. He picks the music. He's the man of honor. And so the capo changes every 2 years. And men are on this path for decades to try to get that spot and that position of honor. So they're kind of like training and giving themselves and laboring, not only to help their parish, but to achieve that individual glory for themselves.
Wow, that is so amazing. Okay, another thing that I loved about this book is the imagery that you were able to include, and that I'm sure NYU Press was very generous in allowing you to include so much photography in the book. Tell me about some photography adventures that you had for gathering these images.
Yes, if they would have let me have 50 pictures in the book, I would have had 50 pictures. But alas, I think there are 20 or 21.
That's pretty good.
Yeah. So part of me being an ethnographer in this community was being willing to work on their behalf. And so after a year spent there, they were like, hey, how about you paint in the basement? Or how about you take pictures for our Facebook? And so a lot of these, so when the Giglio is getting lifted, all the lifters are in the front and there's kind of a blockade often of cops or security guards around them because it's dangerous to be that up close. You can get crushed against a stand, skewered by like a sausage and pepper, like who even knows? So often I would take pictures for the church, which got me like up close to see what the lifters were doing. I would take pictures on the roof, and there are all of these different levels of like roof on top of the church because there's a school as well. So like jumping on different levels of the roof. One year, one of the guys asked me to climb up on the boat and take pictures from there.
Awesome.
And so I was standing like next to the boat, and when they lift the Giglio in the boat, they like kind of violently bounce these structures. So I'm like trying to hold on, trying to take pictures, cut my arm. But I got these beautiful like from above shots of the lifters and the capos. And there's this great moment. It's called the double lift, and it's like the climax of the dance of the Giglio, where the boat and the Giglio come together and the two crews lock hands and they like jump and lift and bounce the structure. And I got to capture all of that from above. But yeah, I'm glad that they asked me to do that work on behalf of the church. So sometimes I would be doing Facebook Lives or convincing cops that I like need to be in the front. Sometimes when Gothamist, the New York City News website would show up, sometimes I'm in the Gothamist pictures.
Awesome.
So that was really fun.
Nice.
Kind of getting up close.
Is there going to be like a website for Supplementary Images that will supplement the book?
Yeah, so that's what I'm planning. Over my time, I took thousands of pictures and videos every year. So I'm hoping on my personal website, I can host a lot of those and host a lot of the videos. I think I can offer kind of glimpses that maybe other people can't, or just kind of more personal pictures that didn't get to go in the book, especially pictures of the basement, the process, the making of the Giglio, some of that backstage stuff.
The book is available for pre-order now, but is there any like shorter pieces that people can dig into that you've already written to preview what is to come in greater detail in the book? Yeah,
so I wrote a short piece called Loving St. Paulinus. That was on a Pathos blog. It's Googleable and also available if you go to AlyssaMaldonado.Estrada.com.
Cool.
It's linked there. And that's a short piece about some of the young men in the community. A lot of these guys traveled to Nola, to Italy together to go to the feast over there. So I write a little bit about that. I have a short piece called Tattoos as Sacramentals that's on AmericanReligion.org. And then I wrote a piece called Men, Tattoos, and Catholic Devotion for the Journal of Material Religion. That's a little bit more about these tattoo narratives and some of the like bonds of mentorship that men form at the feast, and also kind of the efficacious nature of tattoos. I argue that they function like sacramentals, like you can channel presence through your own skin.
Awesome. Okay. Have you chatted with the Parish at all since the book went to press to discuss how they're managing the international health crisis in which we are currently embroiled?
Yeah. So I'm still in contact with everybody at the feast, and this year was really tough for them. And I think that they were in some kind of mourning because this was the first year since World War II that there was no feast. And so already they had a digital kind of like online backbone. A lot of the men see kind of working the social media for the parish as their like devotional practice.
Sure.
So this church was already set up for live streamed masses, already super visible on social media. So during the feast this year, they of course couldn't lift the Giglio, but they did still have a socially distanced procession for Our Lady of Mount Carmel on July 16th. They did still have novenas and live stream masses. They enabled lots of online giving. They even opened up a online feast store where people could purchase like screen printed feast t-shirts.
Awesome.
Or even Our Lady of Mount Carmel and San Paulino masks.
Awesome.
So like I have my like order just came the other day. So I think it's really interesting, this kind of devotional Catholicism COVID paraphernalia mashup.
Amazing. Okay, so when is this book coming out, Lifeblood of the Parish? When can we expect it? And how can we get it? How can we pre-order it? What's the sale code? Tell us everything we need to know.
Yes. Okay. So Lifeblood of the Parish comes out in December, so just a few months away. There is a discount code for pre-orders. That discount code is Lifeblood30, and you can order that. That works at NYU Press's website. That link is in my bio on my Twitter page. I'm at Emo Professor on Twitter, so you can find the NYU Press pre-order link right there. Again, Lifeblood30. And all of this is also linked on my own website, AlyssaMaldonadoEstrada.com.
Fantastic. Well, Alyssa, this has been an absolutely fantastic hour. I'm so grateful that we waited. I could have had you on the show so many other times to talk about your shorter pieces, but talking about the grand concept of your entire book, it has made this worth the wait. So I'm really grateful to you for your time, for your participation, for telling me about this amazing event that I didn't know anything about. And so I hope to actually get to see it for myself someday. And, thanks for telling us all about it. I'm just really excited for this book, and I think that a lot of listeners will hopefully be pre-ordering it with your code as well.
Yay, thank you. This was super, super cool. Thank you for having me.
Classical Ideas is produced by me, Greg Soden. Music on Classical Ideas is composed and performed by Derek Strybeck. You can find his music at www.wearewarmmusic.com. If you like this show, please rate it on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can email me at classicalideas@outlook.com or find me on Patreon at patreon.com/classicalideaspodcast. Thanks so much for listening.